Welcome, friends of the Greasy Shop Rag. Today we're going to take a look at a Husqvarna 66 chainsaw. The customer complaint is that it won't start. And right away we learned that a 61 starter will work on a 66. Looking inside the fuel tank, I'm seeing fresh fuel and what appears to be a brand new fuel filter. That's good. So we're going to take the hood off and look under here and see if he's done anything else. We're going to need a slotted screwdriver and remove the 3 screws that hold this cover down. Alright, it's pretty simple underneath here. Let's get this spark plug out and look inside the cylinder. Got my handy dandy wrench. I'm guessing this is a new spark plug by the way it looks on the outside. And sure enough it is. Hasn't been in there very long at all. Inside the cylinder, a little scratchy. Meaning it's got some wear to it. It's not scored. This saw's it's cut a lot of trees, I'm sure. Let's see what the compression is. What do we got? 145 pounds. So the scratchiness that I see, just a little bit of vertical wear lines inside the cylinder. He said it won't start, so let's test it for spark. Not sure if you could see anything. I must not have been able to because I'm turning the light off. But sure enough, it does have spark. We don't know if it's timed spark, but it does have spark. So let's move on from that and dig into the fuel system a little bit. Plug looks fine, that'll go back in. That is not a scrunch. That's a scrunch. There we go. I must have been thinking about my next step, which is taking off this air filter. Couple of slotted screws are all that hold this on. The older saws are built pretty simple. Here's our carb. Choke functions the way it should, so that's not the reason that it's not starting. You know, when I looked in that cylinder, it was pretty dry in there. Let's pull that plug out and see if it's still dry in there. This little tool for boot that I'm putting on the spark plug to turn that in and out, that thing's pretty handy. Just makes the job easier. So the cylinder is still dry. We're not pulling fuel. Could be the impulse port, it could be something inside the carburetor. Let's just make sure it even pops if we put fuel in it. Now that wasn't a whole lot of fuel, but I just need some sign. In that first pull, it did kind of want to start. I mean, I know that it will run if it gets fuel. So at this point, I'm going to pull the carburetor off and do some more investigating. There's going to be 3 screws that hold this air filter base in place. I'm using a ball end 4mm driver right now. That allows me to turn that screw out on an angle like that. Here's our throttle linkage. We're going to pop that off of there. Yeah, there's our ball end.
Stand on line 1, please. Stand on line 1.
So it was a busy day in the shop. It seemed like every time the phone rang, it was for Dan. And, you know, I feel it's my job to tease him every time he's got to answer the phone. So this bolt looks like it's got a sleeve on it. Just kind of pointing that out. Let's pop this choke linkage off of here. And then we're going to get the fuel line off of here. This is kind of a custom ground tube that I use for popping fuel lines. Seems to work pretty good. Thought I was going to have to plug it, but that carb never pulled any fuel into that line. Here's our insulation block. The impulse from the crankcase to the fuel pump in the carb passes through this block. And there's 2 gaskets, one on each side of it. If those gaskets are bad, if the block is cracked, you know, that could all contribute to not getting a pulse at the carburetor. We still don't know if that's what's happening, but it's a possibility. So we blow a little bit of schmutz off the carburetor. We're going to open this thing up and take a look. First, we're going to start on the metering diaphragm side. And the diaphragm itself isn't stiff. It's not too bad anyway. It's actually a little bit stretched, it looks like. Note that little hook on there, on that dimple. That hook gets hooked into the metering lever. Tiny bit of rust in there. Maybe there was some water in the carb at some time. Let's take a look at the fuel pump side and the micro screen. We got our screws out. Let's pop the cover off. So that, you know, we usually talk about a stiff metering diaphragm. In this case, that fuel pump, the actual pump area of that gasket is kind of stiff. I wonder if the problem is that the pulse from the crankcase isn't strong enough to move that very stiff fuel pump diaphragm. We'll keep digging and see if there's some other explanation here. Alright, we're pulling the spark plug out. And what we're going to do is put a little oil on the impulse hole. You know, when the piston goes up and down, there's a positive and negative pressure in the bottom of the crankcase. And this hole leads right to that area. If I put some oil in there and pull on the cord, I should be able to see that oil moving, bubbling. It's not much. Let's try it a different way. We're going to put our Mightyvac meter on here and set it to pressure. And you can see the needle on the Mightyvac is moving. So I know I have a pulse here. And that little bit of like 1 or 2 pound fluctuation on that meter should be enough to run that fuel pump in the carburetor. So what about the fuel line itself? Maybe there's a hole in it and we're not... We got Dano again. Maybe there's a hole in that fuel line and we're not pulling fuel. We never did test that. And the problem I'm having here is that this isn't like your typical Husky where you got an extra fuel line and the filter's laying in the bottom and you can drag it out of the tank and easily test it. In fact, I'm sure this guy had a heck of a time getting this new filter on here. So we're going to try it a little bit different here. We're going to hook our vac up.
Dan on line 3, please. Dan on line 3.
Poor Dan. We're going to hook our vac up to the carburetor end of the fuel line. And then this is shrink tubing, electrical heat shrink tubing that I put on the end of this pliers. And I'm just going to reach in and I'm going to squeeze the fuel line, pinch it off near the filter. And now I can pressure test that line. And I see that it's holding 10 pounds of pressure. So that line's good. And you can see when I release this that the needle drops. You know, that fuel line's good. There's not a problem there. It's not the reason why we're not pulling fuel to the carburetor. So what are we going to check now? Back to the insulator block. Checking our gaskets. The gaskets look good. I don't see any evidence of leakage or damage. The insulator doesn't look like it's cracked or warped. You know, the screws that hold the carburetor and sandwich this insulator, they were tight when I broke it loose. Let's take a look at this needle. Maybe the needle is stuck in there or something. It came right out. You can kind of, I don't know if you can see it or not, but the needle itself is an orange rubber, but there was a coating on it that was never cleaned off. I doubt that had anything to do with it, but usually what I've seen in the past is that sometimes that coating will get gummed up and end up not letting the needle seat properly. I don't know if I've ever had it where it wouldn't let it open. So that metering lever, the height is correct there. It's flush with the bottom of that fuel chamber. The needle seems to be opening and closing. I don't like this diaphragm, even though it's kind of pliable. It does have a memory, and I'm just wondering if there wasn't enough vacuum to pull that diaphragm. So we're going to put a kit in here and try it again. And you know, that fuel pump diaphragm, that thing was really stiff, and that could have been all the problem was too. All right, there's a hook on that dimple. We're going to hook it into the metering lever and lay that gasket down over the pins and then put the cover on. 4 screws to hold that down. Got to get the right screws though. These are going to be the smaller, shorter screws. The other side goes through that bigger plate, so it needs the bigger screws. Alright, we got that tightened down. On the fuel pump side, our micro screen, that looks fine. We're just going to blow it a little bit and make sure it's clean. Our new fuel pump, we'll lay that down, and its gasket. And then we can put the cover on. You know, I never pressure tested the carburetor. If that gasket along that fuel pump was bad, then the pulse from the crankcase might have been lost, and that wouldn't run the fuel pump. So now, to put this back together, I want to stack everything on these bolts. But you got to do it in the right order. So first I got to get oriented here. It's like I'm playing with a Rubik's Cube or something. So that's right. The fuel pump side was up on this carburetor. And then there's a gasket between the carb and the insulator block. And I just got to figure out which way that gasket goes. And I actually have it on there wrong right now. But I'm kind of working this all out in my head. I think I got the insulator on there wrong too. So that is the way the gasket fits on the insulator, but I don't think the insulator is on there the right way. So now I got to turn this gasket around. Turn it around. What are you doing? Still working it out. Alright. So we got that big slot on the top corner. And that gasket, the big slot, is in the wrong spot right now. That looks better. And the impulse hole lines up with the gasket, and it'll line up with this insulator block and this gasket. That looks right. I don't see anything obvious like it's not sealing or there's a warpage or anything like that. So let's get this on the saw. And take that whole mess and we'll just hold it up against the cylinder. We can find our 4mm. We'll get these screws started. Gotta get that base down there. It's kind of hanging up on a choke lever right now. There we go. And I guess the hardest part is to make sure that the gasket closest to the cylinder is actually still on there and in place. That'd be the one thing you really got to watch for, because the rest of the gaskets will definitely all stay in place. They're on the bolts. We'll hook our choke lever up. Get our fuel line on there. Throw the spark plug in. You know, before I do that, I'm going to give this thing about 10 pulls. And if that impulse is working the way it should, then we just primed the carburetor. And, you know, why would I want to do that with the plug in when it's so much harder to pull? So as long as the plug was out, we primed it. This thing should start a lot easier when I get to that point. All right, our plug is snugged down. We got a few parts laying here yet, like this throttle linkage we're going to need. That just kind of hooks into the carb and then snaps into a lever. There's this dust boot. Well, we're not going to put that on right now. We're just going to toss that to the side. We'll come back to that. We're going to try and start this saw. It might need some carb adjustments. It might not. But if it starts, then that's all I'm going to have for you on the Husqvarna 66 that wouldn't start because it just wasn't transferring that impulse signal into fuel delivery. Thanks for watching. Later. She's a runner.